Kia ora everyone and good morning to our workshop. Could I please invite Councillor Te Waka to open us with a karakia, please?
E rangi e papa manaki te mātou I tēnei wā humaitu aroha me tō wairua maha ki kia tutuki tēnei kaupapa. Tūturu o whiti whakabaua kia teina, haumi e hui e.
Thank you very much, Councillor Te Waka. For those watching online, I banged the gavel for the first time ever because I was inspired by the acting mayor at the Tararua College High Performance Academy team that came into the Pahiatua Chambers, and she taught me a thing or two about controlling a meeting and banging the gavel, so I thought I'd put it to good use. Welcome everyone to our workshop today. We're here to talk about a really important topic, and I just want to give a tiny bit of framing to this before I hand over to staff. So we're going to be looking at our performance framework, and we have some spreadsheet information with some suggested performance measures. These are one of the really important things that we will decide as we move into the long-term plan. What has happened in the past is we've agreed performance measures and perhaps not had the level of focus on them that we could have. And then when we get results that may not be what we were hoping for, we explain them away by saying we haven't measured that right, or we haven't asked the right question. An example of that is in our last long-term plan, and we still see coming through every time performance measures arrive at this table, there's metrics for economic development. And in the last council, we removed most of the funding for economic development. These are things that I'm really keen for us, when we get the results of the performance measures, to spend some time as a council understanding what has come out of those, how we're performing, and then making sure that we have an action to improve results. I don't think that we have to have a performance measure for everything. This is where we have to decide what's really important to our ratepayers and what we want to be accountable for. So I just wanted to put that there. We have to have them in our long-term plan. We will have them for 3 years effectively. So we need to make sure that we're spending the time to get them right. So I would like to hand over to Kata and Rebecca to talk through the work that they've prepared for us.
Thank you, Mayor Scott. Good morning, everyone. So this session will be facilitated by Rebecca, and we also have the activity managers here to answer any questions with regard to the performance measures that we are proposing today. So with that, I will hand over to Rebecca.
Kia ora koutou. Lovely to see you here on this fresh Tararua morning. It was a glorious drive over the highway, seeing the fog set out below, then driving down into the fog and over. It's one of my favourite drives, so it was a good start to the day. I'll pick up where Mayor Scott left off very shortly, but just in terms of where this discussion fits in the wider LTP process and conversation. You guys have developed your draft strategic framework, and you will be looking at that again in a couple of weeks and confirming that in the light of some community feedback that you've had. But that informs your performance measures in terms of your thinking around your strategic priorities and your community outcomes. You want your performance, you want the work, the mahi that is being done at council to be working towards the things that you've said that you want for your community and your community outcomes. So this process relies on the work that you've done there with your strategic framework, and also with your environmental scan, looking at what the planning environment that you're working in, what some of the constraints and challenges that you're facing. All of those things feed into what you're thinking about here. You've also you've had a couple of workshops on activity overviews where you understand what your activities are, what they do, what some of their challenges are. That feeds into today. And then, of course, the performance framework is really important that it's integrated well with your budget, because you're resourcing the levels of service that you determine through your budget. So understanding again where those pressure points, what the challenges are for your for the delivery of your activities, those things are a key consideration when we start talking about budget in a few weeks. So this is a really key part of the LTP, and from where the community sits, it's kind of where the rubber hits the road. And like Scott said, it's really critical for you guys for monitoring how the impact of the work that council is doing in the community, and accountability and transparency and all those things. So in terms of timing, we would be looking, this is an iterative process, but we would be looking to have a final draft in place to hand over to audit in the new year. So this is the first of several discussions, and we will return to this at each point, hopefully becoming more and more refined. So the purpose of today is to present the first cut review of the performance framework. So this is not by any stretch close to final. This is the first cut. The activity managers have sort of done a first go, and with your input, we will have a further discussion with further refinements. Inputs to today's discussion, as I've already said, your strategic framework. There's the existing performance framework, or your existing levels of service in the LTP here, and I'll point those out shortly. And then, of course, all that we're doing is with the systems improvement bill and the requirements of that kind of rattling around in our minds at the same time. And of course, today's discussion feeds into the updating of the measures in the LTP. So in terms of the LTP document itself, some of you may be using the online version, but the levels of service and measures and targets in the LTP exist in this orange tab section in your LTP. So if you want to be using this as a kind of a source document type situation, or referring to it, that's where you will find the current measures and targets that you have. So what we're looking for from you today is feedback on this first cut, levels of comfort with some of the changes that are being suggested, and direction on any further work that you want done, or consideration of levels of service or measures or targets. So no decisions today, but hopefully management will come away with some really great feedback that we can work into the next iteration. So what is a performance framework? So a performance framework is not unique to local government. I'm sure that many of you in your professional lives have participated in these processes before, but it's an integrated way of assessing and monitoring how well the organisation is achieving what it says it wants to achieve. So in our case, in local government, there are some things set out in the Act that we must have in our framework. So obviously it's grounded in the purpose of local government. The Local Government Act requires councils to have community outcomes. It requires you to set out and describe your activities, and then your levels of service, your measures and targets, and your budget. So those are the things that are actually requirements of the LGA. In a lot of councils, and in your case, you have fleshed out your performance or your strategic framework to include a vision and some priorities, or in the words of your framework, your pillars, to help kind of give a more rounded picture of who you are and what you're trying to achieve. So in terms of the framework from top to bottom, there should be a clear line of sight from the purpose of local government through your vision, your community outcomes, your pillars, your activities, levels of service, measures and targets and budget. They should all be telling the same story. They should all be aiming for the same outcome or the same thing. Likewise, what you see in the budget should be giving effect all the way back up, and you should be able to say this budget demonstrates how we are giving effect to our community outcomes and how it achieves for us the purpose of why we exist. Any questions before I move on there, or comments? Cool. So in terms of the strategic alignment, as we've said, your current framework is in draft, and you will have another look at this in the light of the feedback that you've gotten from the community in a couple of weeks. But we have used your community outcomes, the 3 points across the bottom, as the basis for the review so far. And if you make any adjustments, we'll just have to go back and make sure that everything is still in alignment after that. And you'll note that in the spreadsheets that you've got, which are working documents, there are bullet points across the top under each activity to show where the alignment exists with your outcomes.
And no, thanks for that, Rebecca. And just a quick comment on this. I was watching through the budget challenge where we asked for people to comment on this. Generally, it was fairly well supported, but I definitely encourage some changes, probably around language, where, so particularly the reputation identity pillar, where it's perhaps been misunderstood what we were trying to achieve with that. So, that's certainly not about spin. This is about what we need to be doing to rebuild trust. So I know the team are looking at some suggestions for that now. The sentiment of it, though, appears to be well supported. It's really just making sure that the language matches what we intend and what our community wants to deliver.
Also, I haven't put it up on the slide, but again, the Systems Improvement Bill requires Council to be thinking about your core services and your regulatory functions and those things. So again, in the working document, there's a note at the top to say this activity is a core or a statutory activity, or in some cases they are not listed in the Systems Improvement Bill, but they are enabling, they're a critical enabler of those other activities. So that's noted there. Oops. Right, so this is a snip from the Local Government Act. This is on one of the things that is required in the long-term plan, and the LGA describes it as a statement of service provision, but essentially that's what we're talking about today. So in your LTP, in each of these activity statements that you've got in your LTP, you need to have a statement of the intended levels of service that you are going to provide, and that is what we're talking about today. It talks about the need to include any mandatory measures. It doesn't say mandatory, but under 4A there, that's essentially what it's talking about, where there are some activities have mandatory measures and many don't. That's mostly in relation to roading, what it was the waters, and flood protection, which is regional councils. So, and B then also talks about the measures that, and I think it's really important to note this, that will enable the public to assess the level of service. So the measures that, and the levels of service and measures that go into the LTP, those are, you're thinking about from the community's point of view, what is important to them to assess council's performance. There will be lots of other ways council measures its performance, and those also need to tie into the framework, but they don't have to go into the LTP. So like Scott said before, not every measure or not every performance measure that council uses goes into the LTP. What you're thinking about and what we're talking about in these process is what is going to be of importance or interest to the community. And then we have to include targets, and then also it's not so clear, I guess, in the current LTP, but it's really important to provide a bit of a narrative around why there's been changes, what the implications of those changes might be. So we will work on that as we go. Questions? Oh yeah.
Sorry. Thanks, Rebecca. I guess I just wanted to make a comment around some of the difficulties we have from an operational perspective when we look at the performance measures, and that's really trying to align between the satisfaction, the community satisfaction, the budget, how much we invest in a core service versus non-core service. In the past, we haven't been very good at doing that, but today, hopefully, that's an attempt of aligning between these. So, for example, if you have a service that contributes, 1% towards the rate, how many performance measures are you really going to have, especially if it's a non-core service? So that's something we really have to just bear in mind. And you will see in your spreadsheets the recommendations where you see some have been crossed out, but that's what we are trying to do, is just make sure we've got a really good view on, what the community wants us to do, what they're satisfied with and not, versus how much we invest and what budget we allocate for core services versus non-core services. Thank you.
So as Carter just referenced, community satisfaction is a significant part of the framework, and a key way that is measured is through the Community Voice Survey. Now, I've underlined that because in the version of the spreadsheet of the PowerPoint that you have, it's the annual resident survey or something like that. But I've recently learned that the proper way to reference it is the Community Voice Survey. So I will be doing that from now on. And so it's important for you to keep that in mind as you think about how you how you want to set your targets around community satisfaction for some measures.
And just a quick comment on that, and then I'll come to you, Steve. Part of this, as we progress our discussions, will be making sure that we have a good source to be able to measure community satisfaction that we're confident in and that is statistically significant, because we could make some quite big decisions based off satisfaction. So to flag with the team that as we go through, that needs to be some consideration we give to how we are collecting that and understanding the needs of our community, because it becomes very important. Sorry, Steve.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor Scott. Following on from what Mayor Scott just said, it's in the same vein. We're trying to, this quote here, our district receives reliable core services, et cetera, What is the benchmark? Because you made the comment, we haven't done this well in the past. So what are we benchmarking to?
Good question. There's a couple of answers to that question. Part of the focus of the Systems Improvement Bill is to address the fact that perhaps there hasn't been good consistency across councils and that kind of thing in terms of benchmarking. So that's one of the things that may impact that. We haven't seen what that looks like in practice yet. They haven't put those regulations out yet, and so we will have to respond to those when it comes through, hopefully in not too long. In terms of the other answer is that you'll see in the working documents, there's a baseline year and an actual column. So the idea is to be able to provide some continuity for those measures that have been measured over previous years. So you're comparing against previous years. Where there's a new measure, you can either say that our benchmark is the performance for the first year we measure it, or you could set a target for that first year and see how you go, and then and potentially adjust or reflect on what was the challenges around achieving that or not. So benchmarking is, you can kind of, there's a different ways of tackling it, essentially. The question, the answer.
I was getting in the fog at the end of your answer, yeah. But we'll see. We'll let the day progress, and we'll probably be clear. Thank you.
Maybe could I just, because I think I know what you're meaning, and and hopefully I won't put you further in the fog. I'll try not to. I think what you've highlighted, Steve, is really the importance of getting the performance measures right. So we look back at what our strategy is and say, this is what we're wanting to achieve. Without measures, they're just words. They don't mean anything. So what we need to do as a team is make sure that we're comfortable that the performance measures will reflect what that's saying. And that's really key, because we like the wording. We want to do that, but we need to be testing ourselves, our staff, and the community needs to test us to say, did you actually deliver on that? And if we don't have the performance measures right to meet those, then we're never going to be able to do it. And I think that's where the importance of looking that we are delivering those high quality services, that our residents are satisfied with what they're getting. All of that needs to be reflected here.
Yes, thanks, Mayor Scott. The fog is lifting.
Thank goodness. Not yet in Woodville, I hear. Peter Naylor.
So when I was looking through this and I was going through and I was reading through, and I go, based on the community survey, and then I see it's put in the quarterly report, and then it brings me back to remembering the performance and monitoring things that we've got not achieved yet because we're waiting for the annual survey. So anything that's waiting on the and taking into point Scott's talk about how are we going to measure, assuming that we end up with just the community survey, then I'd love to see these things not even be in the quarterly reports, because it doesn't look right when you're going through the report and you've got all that information there. It has been a little bugbear for the last couple of quarterly reports that I've had to sit through. And I also really like the point you were talking about a moment ago. Should we be measuring something that only has a 1% impact with 5 questions? And I'm stealing probably Deputy Mayor Ward's thunder a little bit from later in the day, but is that we've really got to tighten up on how much information we're seeking, the importance of that information, and coming back to Scott's point about the community survey, I think that we need to be thinking about, are we just going to wait for the annual community survey as the only performance measure for some of these things that might be more important, and we need to get a handle on sooner in the year rather than waiting till the end of the year to find out that the community's dissatisfied with something else. So that's my rant for the moment.
Thank you for your rant. I just want to clarify a little bit within it, and the community voice survey replaces the annual survey. When you're talking about the things that have come through in the performance and monitoring committee, and it is a really important point that you've raised, because that is going to be the committee that is going to spend a fair bit of time digging into the granular detail of these. But could you sort of further explain, because this will be really helpful as we work through, what you talked about having some bugbears when you went through those reports. Could you just explain that a bit more, Peter?
So in the quarterly reports, because I am on the Performance and Monitoring Committee, in the quarterly reports we would have 100 items that we're going through and looking, and 50 of those would be we have to wait for the community survey to see them. And so when you're in that committee meeting, you're looking at all through 100 items, and it takes your focus away from the ones that we should really be looking at. So, if we can say, okay, this is going to be at the end of the year, it only needs to be in the annual report. Because when you go through these line items here, if we look at, say on this first page here, 3.2, the method of measurement is the community survey, but the reporting requirements are quarterly report and annual report. To me, it should only be the annual report.
Gotcha. Chief Executive wants to make a comment.
Thank you, through you, Chair. Look, I think you're hitting on an interesting point, right? Because so part of our challenge is where the measures are set is to display them to the council, and if we don't have them displayed, even if they are the result isn't coming yet, then that can lead to questions of what are we measuring, what are we're not measuring. But I think the other bit there is, and this is part of the dance, I think, is so we've got the measures, and then we've got the question of how we measure them. And so harking back to how, as I understand, we've done in the past, we used to do them 3 times a year. So, there's a decision there, and part of the decision not to do them 3 times a year is because there's costs associated with that, right? So it becomes more efficient to do it once a year. So we kind of need to think about both those together, right? What does council want to measure, and how does council want to get the information against the measure? And those two need to satisfy you and need to give us the visibility of how the business is running for you and then for the community.
I'll just make a quick comment, and then I'll go to Sharon and then to Peter. I don't disagree with your comment, by the way, so I think this is something we can give some more thought to. I also don't disagree with Corin's comment, but I think that there is a potentially some different compromises that can be used. So all of the ones where we're waiting on results could perhaps be grouped together, so your eye goes, right, these are the things we know we're going to monitor, and then we focus on the things that we already have. There is a wider discussion, though, and again it goes to what Corin was saying, is if we really want to be focused on providing a high level of service and understanding that, we do need to have some discussions on how we're measuring that and what investment we put in to measuring that. We've de-invested somewhat for the right reasons, but we need to just be really comfortable that that's the right thing for us to do. I'll go to Sharon and then back to you, Peter.
Thanks, Ms. Scott. I won't do quite the rant. I wouldn't call it a rant. I just want to concur with Councillor Peter and what's been said, that as I studied this prior, I was thinking, what lens am I going to be applying today? Because as Rebecca and Carter have outlined, this is an opportunity now to reset what our next 3 years could look like, and the importance of us measuring the right things for our ratepayers is really critical to me. So as we go through today, I have 3 things in my mind that may become a regular question for the team. That will be, is this simpler? Does the suggestions here make it simpler for us? What does it mean to the ratepayer if we measure this? There are obviously mandatory ones we have very little option on, but there's quite a few of the discretionary ones there that we can either choose to well, what difference would it make to our ratepayers if we did this? And also in support of the third question I'll be looking at is when I look at the strategic framework that we've done a lot of work around, how would doing this way and measuring it this way achieve that strategic outcome. So I apologise in advance for the next 3 years where those will be the questions that I may well ask. But I think it's really important that you know, I've sat around this table, this is one of the number of times that I've seen this, and it's very easy to just keep doing what we've always done. And I think Rebecca and the officers are providing us with an opportunity now to say, will this make a difference if we spend a lot of time and effort measuring it? And does it make it simpler? Because the simpler we can make this, A, for our ratepayers, and B, for us to keep an eye on the trends that are happening, the more value there is in actually talking about this. Thank you, Mayor Scott.
Thanks, Sharon. Peter.
Yeah, not trying to steal the thunder too much either of the further discussion we'll be having. I did like the things where you'd moved them to trends rather than to actual performance measures. And I think that, you know, coming back to a couple of discussion points again already is that, yeah, there is some stuff that's really important to measure and there's stuff that's less important to measure, and there's stuff there that won't make any difference whether we measure it or not. And do we need to be looking at how that stuff that's important to measure that could go off track in less than a year, is there some way that we could actually be engaging with the community, like the communications team have done a fantastic job with the budget challenge, around stuff that is important and that is high risk, and we can be doing it more than annually without increasing the cost, because there's a cost to doing all this. And on the next slide I actually had a comment, and I'll give it to you now, and that is that we shouldn't really be monitoring anything that takes you hours or days to generate a report on, that doesn't provide a lot of value. So we need to make sure that the cost of the generation of the measurement can be done in a simple way. And I know that you're already really smart with how you're now starting to use some of the AI tools and things like that to generate those reports. But that's just another lens to throw on the top of the 3 that Sharon's going to fire at you left, right and centre. But yeah, that just saves you on the next slide me opening my mouth.
Thanks. We'll move to the next slide.
Actually, Corin, I was going to throw to you for the second bullet point and then the first bullet point of the next slide as well. So around the customer satisfaction, customer service. So.
Thank you, Rebecca. Through you, Chair. Yeah, so one of the things as we were working through this and looking at the measures, we had a really good conversation around the fact that we had a measure baked in around people's experience of customer service, which was really around them coming into the customer team. What I felt we were lacking, and I think we got there as a team, was that measuring customer service at the points that customer service happens within the business. So what we're attempting to do, and you'll see this as bake that in as measures consistently through the organisation, so that we can understand where the community is enjoying that customer service and where we've got room for improvement, so then we can target. So I think that's really important for us, especially thinking about the framework. I mean, that speaks to reputation, and it speaks to the way our community actually experience their interactions with council right across the board. So that for me, that's a recurring theme, and you'll see that coming through.
Seeing lots and lots around the tables.
Can I just clarify? There's a bit of work to do to actually get that into the framework. So what you've got doesn't quite have that there yet, the consistency stuff. So again, that will come back through into the next iteration. But the work has started on that. But it seems like a straightforward thing to just plonk something in at the top, but it's never that straightforward. So just to clarify that. And then...
And just a quick comment that there were a lot of nods around the room as you were saying that. I think that's really powerful. It's also a great way to see, and on the next slide, which you're going to talk to the first bullet point, but talks about resourcing constraints and other parts. It's important for us to understand what the linkage between service satisfaction and resourcing might be or might not be, actually. So that becomes... I think that will be very, very valuable for us as a governance tool to have that at that level. So thank you.
So, and just thank you, Jill, one more comment about that. So we have also explored, so you'll see as part of the process, Rebecca's attempted to capture the confidence level in the organisation around delivering against the measures. And in some cases, I think we've got a high confidence, but we may also have questions about within the organisation around whether we are resourced correctly in those areas or where people are experiencing pressures from multiple pieces of work. So we are going to be doing some work to understand that as well, so that we've got a better understanding of where the pressures are in the business. And then if through that we have any signals that we may be struggling to meet measures, what we might need to do, because sometimes that can be a resourcing issue, sometimes that can be other factors as well, but I think we need to have that understanding. So I think we're starting in a really good way to both have meaningful measures and then have an understanding of what's going on in the business if we're struggling to meet those. And I guess on the other side, if we're blowing those measures out of the water, what does that mean as well?
Chris.
Thank you, Scott. And Corin, thank you for the comments. I mean, it's something that I've heard a lot from people about communication to council, not hearing back about jobs or not hearing about things that are going on. They go to the centres and get a job, do something raised there, never hear back from further down the line. It sort of leads towards what's happening, what has been worked on by Carter with the ERP solution and trying to find a way to leverage the tools to make sure that our CRM has actually been responded to in the right way, that our jobs and everything is resourced in the right way in that same, application. But I think, the biggest one is you sort of touched on getting the right communication, and I think it adds to the work if you don't communicate. So you'll get more response, more people finding out, more people annoyed, less actual answers and more blunt just anger rather than getting the job done. So those are some of my...
And I think it's like one thing I reflect on as we talk about this is and comments and emails and discussions that we will all have with elected members, give a little bit more richness sometimes to the result, and where customer service might be ranked low, almost always there's a caveat to that of we had incredible service from the customer service representatives, almost always, but somewhere along the line, depending on where it went, their perception is that the process fell down for them. Often, by the way, the process didn't fall down. That the process often didn't fall down at all. Almost every time I've gone and investigated it, absolutely it has been done. It's just it hasn't been communicated back. So that helps us really understand where that might be happening, because we're very well served by our frontline customer service teams.
All right, so we're about to get stuck into the working documents. But again, just to say, so far the focus has been on trying to say, is this useful to the community? In some cases, you start out going, oh well, this one isn't useful, but so what are we actually trying to measure? And you end up wrestling and finding it quite difficult to find anything better than was there already. So this is where you guys are going to really be super helpful, and so we haven't necessarily got every single thing right, or necessarily made every single thing better, but this is where you guys can help us with that. So like I say, very much still a work in progress, and really this collaborative sort of process is really important.
Thank you, Ms. Scott. Rebecca, I have a question regarding mandatory versus discretionary. Are we able to change the wording of a mandatory reporting measure, or do we have to stick with exactly what is reflected as we work through them?
I'd have to throw to the people who have the mandatory measures. I know in some cases the measure itself is a requirement, but councils can choose their targets and things like that. But in terms of the actual wording,
No.
no, what?
You can't change the wording. It has to be.
Sorry, we need just on microphone, please.
Sure, that's sweet.
Morena, sorry, I did try to keep it short and sweet. No, we cannot change the wording. We can specify how we will calculate it, but that needs to be within our asset or activity management plan, and that's what audit will check too.
Steve.
Thank you, Mayor. I just needed a clearance on the point 2, right? Just the wording there while we're on words. It says customer service requests relating to roads are responded to within 3 working days.
We'll get into the granular. So do you mind just holding that
Yeah,
one?
yeah.
And we'll come into that when we get into the spreadsheet. But
Thank you. I am.
This is good. This is good. Okie dokie. So you've all got the spreadsheets in front of you. In terms of people who might be tuning in online, do you want me to put the spreadsheets up online? I'm not sure how helpful they're going to be because they're probably going to be teeny tiny, but
let's have a look at them. But the thing to note, and I hope I'm right in saying this, so I'll get a nod from Carter if I'm wrong, but these spreadsheets will be up on the website with the agenda pack. Are these included as an attachment in the agenda pack? Yes. Yeah, perfect. So if people aren't able to read this online, although it probably will show okay, you can have a look at this, the document on the website and the agenda pack.
okay. Let's see how it goes. In terms of just navigating this this document, it's a bit of a beast in terms of kind of spreadsheets and columns and things like that. Columns and rows. So the intent behind this, all this information, is to try and bring everything together in one place, because for you guys, so that you can see and navigate this process, but also so that when the audit team comes, they've also got everything in one place. Because when the audit team comes, they interrogate the activity managers for source information and all of that kind of thing. So if we can get it all in one place and manage it like that, it makes the process much easier. When it comes to actually putting it into the long-term plan document, we just strip out all the green stuff, and the white columns are the things that we'll go through into the document here. So it will be very much tidier, and the end product will be tidier, but for the moment we kind of deal with this big beast. Also, just to say that that far left-hand column where it's just got LTP all the way down, in some cases, the recommendation is to take it from what was an LTP measure to an internal measure. So you'll see in some activities it will say internal there, so it will still be measured. It may still be a useful measure, but doesn't necessarily need to go into the LTP. And I'm sure you've figured it out by now, but for people who have not seen this before, where we make it, the way we have done this in terms of edits is anything new or additional is underlined, and we've struck through any things that we recommend being deleted, just so that you can see the evolution from what was there to what's being suggested. So, as we did with funding needs assessments, we'll take it line by line, essentially, and hear from you any questions or comments, and I will make scribbly notes as we go and work that back into the next iteration. I won't be making notes up on the screen. So, happy to get going? Right, transport group. We've got roading and we've got footpaths. We have Andrew here to speak to any specifics, lucky him. Do you want to come and...
Andrew says that question's too easy, so...
Very technical answers.
Right, so you will see that there are some mandatory and some discretionary measures here. As Councillor Naylor noted, there's been a shift to a more of a trend-based approach to the targets rather than a specific percentage-based target. And also to note that with 3.1, since this was sent out, we have concluded that it would be more useful to set those targets out in their own separate lines, just for transparency and simplicity. So there's a note there in the little box to say that that will be...
Rebecca, could we just get a bit more of an explanation as to why the recommendation would be to move the targets more to the same or less than previous year, rather than having a fixed target of satisfaction? And look, I understand, by the way, that that's a great measure to know that we're trending in a good way, but my concern is that we may lose the focus on this is actually where we expect satisfaction to be. I'd just like to understand a little bit more what perhaps the risks and advantages of moving to that system would be.
So I'll take that one. So I suppose the context behind moving to the trend is around there's a number of measures in there that we know without the funding to support it won't be achieved. For example, the footpath measures where I think it's off the top of my head, 75, is it? Satisfaction. Like without the funding to support that, and we know what the struggles we have in our footpath funding budget, we have a high target that is driving, I suppose, behaviours from the team to drive amenity, I suppose, values, make them look good, make them feel good, but it's not actually fixing the fundamental root causes of the problems. I suppose moving to the trend sort of approach at least gives us some context about, based on the funding we've got or the ability to influence that trend within the funding parameters, that we are doing well or not. Like I say, if it might be more about the target, and I do note in the meeting we had the other day, the workshop we had the other day that we talked about, we've got if we've got a high target and we're overachieving, maybe we're trying to over deliver services. So that was probably the context about some of those hard and fast measures that we've got in that system. If we recognise we can't afford to fund those improvements, then do we have the right measure or the way to measure it?
I mean, look, I think we would get the trend anyway, because we'd know what our results were in the previous review cycle. Yeah, I'd be interested in what people think, because I definitely accept your argument, but then I wonder if that's what our job is to set the percentage of satisfaction, or actually sometimes it is okay not to be hitting the targets, but we use the satisfaction surveys, we use other measures as well, budget challenge we've had, to say, do we need to? We know we're, and this is what I want these measures to be used to actually enable the discussions of, does this need more resource put into it? Does this need more funding? And if we say that but go, no, we're not going to put more funding in, then we've got our measure wrong. So I'm just, it concerns me slightly, Peter.
Yeah, because when I looked at the first one, being 1.1, and I went, okay, less than 0 doesn't make sense because you don't get less than 0 road deaths on the road, so should be less than 1, if anything. But then same or less than previous year, if we had, say, we had a bad year this year and we had 4 road deaths, then all of a sudden having a target of less than 4 or less isn't a good number. So, and that was just, one example there I thought of. And just as a matter of interest, and I noticed you've taken out the, and I said, so on this one, I totally agree that we shouldn't be measuring the state highways, because obviously we don't have any impact on the safety of the state highways and whether the roading condition caused a death, because while as a council on road deaths, if the death was caused on our local road because of the condition of the road, then obviously that's a concern of us as a governor. If the death on the local road was caused because the guy was an idiot and drunk too much and crashed, and then that can't be our responsibility. So while it's important that we measure these things to make sure that our roads are in as good a condition as they possibly can be and it's not causing deaths or serious accidents, it's really good to see the state highways are out. But just, sorry, long-winded way to get to my question. What's our current rate of deaths on Tararua District Council controlled roads? Do we have any? Or
they get reported in the performance measures that come through.
Yeah, I didn't.
But I think without getting into that,
Yeah.
I think your point is well made.
Yeah.
And I just want to just further articulate my point, because I probably didn't make it that clearly. Where my concern really is, having a measure of the same or less than previous years is built on the assumption that we are happy with the performance as it currently is at, and that we believe that performance is acceptable. Now, that may be true in many of those cases, but I think we do have a danger of going straight in with the assumption that our performance in those areas we are fine with and they're acceptable. So that's probably where my concern sits. Peter, and then Chris.
Thanks, Chair. Scott. With regard to footpaths, I agree with Andrew's comment that in effect, unless we're prepared to throw a lot of money at it, there's little point in asking people whether they're satisfied with the footpaths, because they won't be. It's a discretionary item anyway. I don't think we're satisfied with the footpaths ourselves. So what's the point of having it there?
Well, let me quickly answer that in two quick ways. And I appreciate your point, Peter, for sure. It is one of the highest levels of dissatisfaction. We know that our community is unhappy. We know that we're unhappy with the level of footpaths. We did make a decision in our last annual plan to include additional budget into our footpaths, and in part because we knew that people were dissatisfied. The other bit that I'm really keen, and this will be our future workshop and we will dig into, I've become aware that we also have a substantial reserve for footpaths. It has a fair amount of money in it, quite a substantial amount of money in it, sitting in a bank account. We know that there's a high level of dissatisfaction. We need to have the discussion of why on earth aren't we using it? But if we're not measuring that, that moves the driver away. That's my concern, removes the driver away from the discussion. And I think all too often we can sit there as a team and say there is nothing we can do about it, but actually often there are ways. They sometimes just haven't hit our inboxes. So we will have a much more in-depth discussion about that, because there could absolutely be some solutions. I'll go Chris, then Steve.
Thank you, Scott. And I think you're right on the measures. I don't necessarily like seeing a worded same or less than previous year. I think having a number there, having something that you can actually relate to matters, because surprisingly people do read the reports. They do look at the data and they want to see what your measure is, and then they consider what that actually looks like. So if you have a measure of 75%, people go, well, what, you can miss out 25% of the time. So people do look at that type of thing. So having a good target in there, whether we achieve it or not, that's up to individual committees to look at and find out why that's not being done, and then council's job to, as Scott has alluded to work that out as to why it's not happening. So I think it's the right way of thinking.
Steve.
Thank you, Mayor Scott. Just alluding back to what you said about jam jars and money around the place. Have we got a lot of them around in other accounts that we can use? Because I think if you know about them, we don't know about them. With respect, I'm sure the person that trips on the footpath would love to use it.
I entirely agree with your comment, and I'm asking quite a few questions and becoming increasingly aware, and I would like to bring a high level of transparency to all of these, as we say, jam jars, which I've never liked the terminology of, but our depreciation, our reserve funding, look, they are reported in our annual report, but we need to have an understanding of what is there, what is available, actually further how we depreciate. So there'll be some discussion about that, and what the consequences might be also of using these funds, because it's not as simple as just withdrawing things out of a bank account. There's so this is probably not for now. I just wanted to use that as a bit of an answer, that there are different ways of doing things. This will be worthy of its own very in-depth workshop, which I'm very excited to see. I'll go Corin. Does that answer your question for a start? I'll go Corin and then Sharon.
Through you, Chair, you've just given my speech, so I'll leave it at that.
Well, it was clearly a good one, Corin, so well done. Sharon.
Thanks, me, Scott. Andrew, I'm going to try and look you in the eyes. I'll work through this. It's going to be quite contentious, what I'm going to suggest, but I've gone line by line, and that's why I asked the questions about the mandatory. Is there an implication in some of our mandatories that would actually answer some of our discretionary? And so if I went to the top and said, how could we make this simpler, I would be going for just the mandatory measures. However, there is some implications in this, Andrew, and if you look, for example, at item number 2, our customers are responded to in a timely manner. I was trying to think what makes up this absolutely critical activity for us. when people drive our roads. And, there is an implication, for instance, in 3.1 that the quality of the ride on a sealed road implies whether any potholes, was it wide enough. There's a whole lot of implications in just that one measure that in 3.1 we are trying to tease out a little bit more, because we have discussions around the table, well, is the road sealed or is it unsealed? Because there's different levels of service around those things. And so, and I looked at item number 2, I mean, that goes to our reputation. That crosses over into how we do our CRMs, how quickly do we respond to potholes. There are a whole lot of implications in our mandatory stuff, and we've debated, we need a bit more detail on this or we need a bit more detail on that. But I'm asking now, what is the value of having that detail to our ratepayers? And I'm beginning to think if as we work through this, we've talked about trends, because, we would like to know, is it the sealed roads or the unsealed roads? Is it the standard of the footpaths in terms of the level of satisfaction? That's not one of our mandatory measures. You're suggesting it's a discretionary one. So as a rough first cut, if we took out all the discretionary and converted some of those into a trend analysis rather than a target, we might start to see this grouping that you alluded to at the start, Mayor Scott, that if we had activities that ended up in an annual report versus the stuff that's really going to matter if we don't change it now in the next couple of months. I'm just trying to apply a simpler approach to this without becoming, how do I say this, too complicated and with less meaning. So if we had mandatory and we had discretionary separated out, is the discretionary for us or is it for our ratepayer? Because mandatory, we have no choice. And Sarah's smiling at me, which...
Could I just add to that question as you're considering it? And I see where you're going, and simpler is great. It probably goes a little bit to the answer to Peter's before of what would worry me, and this is where it gets tricky, is we need to have the information to make investment and budgetary decisions. And so if we took out the discretionary and didn't understand the satisfaction, it wouldn't sometimes drive questions of, do we need to invest more in here when we're doing our NLTP funding bids to support those? We have high level of dissatisfaction. So our mandatory are important because we have to do them. Our opportunity with our discretionary is to go, as governors, what do we want to know that isn't captured in the mandatory that will help us govern this organisation and help us make budgetary decisions? Do we have too many of them? Yep, absolutely. But I think before we say we get rid of all of them, we do need to do a bit of an exercise of, can some of them be grouped to still give us that information? And what ones actually could be captured elsewhere or we're not going to make a budgetary decision on. And I think those are the ones that go. But I'll hand over to Andrew for your thoughts on both of those positions.
This is the first, well, as far as I'm aware, for the last 3 NLTPs that we've put forward, that we've started to try and tweak some of these measures to better suit, I suppose, the need for funding. So hence why going from urban sealed to urban rural to sealed unsealed helps with our narrative when we're pitching to NZTA for funding side of things. So if we can show where the pressures are through some of them, it's beneficial in telling the story. There is, I suppose, some of those metrics that we're trying to explore changes to are based around how we can, I suppose, when we're looking to mean, I look at this from a 3-year funding block rather than the annual side of things, because we've got fixed funding for 3 years. What can we use the narrative in these surveys to influence the next conversation? Hence why the footpath side of things for us, having a measure of the target, the fixed target that it is great to show that we're underperforming. But when we've got such a high measure, it shows that, well, are we trying to overachieve it? So it raises questions straight away when we're trying to talk to the investment advisor about, well, you're kind of just selling the wrong story. And with the shifts in funding and the government policy statement for transport, they've basically said you are not going to get funding for these nice to haves. And then we've got, I suppose, in the operational side of things, when the biggest driver of some of our challenges in the footpath space is the vehicle entrance ways, and yes, trying to work in the background to try and figure this out. It's when you're presenting these measures that the questions to the public, they ask about footpaths, not realising that there's a battle between the vehicle entrance ways and the footpaths themselves. You'll find 3 faults along your footpath that are related to vehicle entrance ways, and so you'll say they're in poor condition. You're not actually looking; they're not gauged towards the overall network of footpaths. Hence why I suppose from operationally, it's easier to work on a trend basis. In regards to the hard and fast pavement measures, the smooth travel exposure, the adjustments we're seeking there is around the differential level of service. So right now, the 95% that's set in the measure was basically what was established in, I think, 2014 when these DIO measures came out. When you look at all our neighbouring councils, they are in the sort of 90 to 92%. So we've set this metric quite high, and that's driving modelling around reseal requirements, rehabilitation requirements, and it may change the narrative if we have the right measures in there. So as we introduce the differential level of service with the high volume roads being serviced to a high standard, right now the high volume roads are actually getting a lower standard than what some of our lowest volumes roads are. So it's helped, I suppose, direct the investment to the right areas and helps shape the modelling. So yeah, we haven't changed the smooth traffic exposure since 2014, and while we achieve it on average, it's actually masked behind some of we're underachieving on certain roads and overachieving in 35% of our highest of the lowest volume roads. So
Thanks, Andrew. Well explained.
I'm happy to take further comments and questions from you as you have them for this particular group. So roading or footpaths. Any further comments? Are you okay with the ones at the bottom of that first page that have been proposed for deletion, removal? Yeah.
Peter.
I just had one probably rhetorical question, and it was just on the percentage of residents rate urban sealed roads as fairly satisfactory, and the percentage of residents rate rural unsealed roads. It seemed to me that DIA doesn't seem to really have any care for anything apart from the sealed roads. Is there any sort of, do we know why DIA doesn't care? Why unsealed roads aren't mandatory to have some level of service on? It's, as I was saying, it's a rhetorical question probably rather than a real question. Yeah.
I'd suggest it's tied in with seal roads are quite easy to measure condition. So with the smooth travel exposure, the roughness survey, that's something that happens, whereas unsealed roads are quite dynamic and shape and move sort of every time it rains. Just one point I missed on the questions around the customer service and the response. So the 3-day response is basically getting on the phone and telling and responding to them if they request it. It's not necessarily the work will get done, because that comes down to where we intervene, the intervention level. So it might be a case of, if we are underachieving it, it's getting on the phone and saying, sorry, we're not going to do that work.
Cheers. Just a quick one. I just noted on 1.1 about the first comment, the change expressed as a number, and yet we're trying to change to a. Yep. Cool.
Yeah, I was going to bring that up at a different time, but since you brought it up, let's revisit that. So that's a mandatory measure. Sarah has confirmed with us that we can't change the wording of that. And so, yeah, what it's asking is the change expresses a number, not a target number. So that's where the challenge comes in around expressing that target. So if you have 0 deaths or serious injury crashes in a year, that's what we want. We want to be able to have a target of 0 per year, but the measure is stated the change from the previous year. So it's a bit tricky on that one. So
Just
I guess
shocking that government hasn't quite got that right with language. I'm astounded.
So in that case, then the same or less than previous year. If we've had 0, we want it to be the same. If we've had 4, we want it to be less.
Yeah, just to make a comment, just because from an auditor's perspective, you would pull that apart, going that's could be particularly non-compliant because it's not clear. That's the only reason I raised it.
I think if we get the language right and show a change expressed as a number, and I'm fairly confident that Sarah will give some quite strong advice when we come to that. Steve?
Yeah, just going back to that point I raised at the very beginning at 2.1, is about that 3 day stuff while you're in the chair. And we know how it works in this room. Okay, they make the call, the customer service is really good. And we know that, like, some of the stuff that I've brought to you it's actually brought, and it's in the pipeline in another grouping, okay, a long time. So just for the clarity, there's 2 there on your document, and it's 1.3, also no change, and it says 3 working days. So the definition of 3 working days is it's logged, right? And the question is there any correspondence going back to the person who logged this CRM? Like the definition, we know the road isn't going to get fixed in 3 days, but it's been logged. Does the person that made you or logged the CRM, are they physically told?
So
I know that creates a lot of work.
As they come through the CRM system, there is a do you require callback or yes or no. They are generally coming through as no, and Inteno doesn't give a function to ask for a callback or not, and it needs to be in the words. And so I know there's a bit of a systems issue that we're trying to, I suppose, work through. So fundamentally, a lot of people will say no, but we're working right now to try and call back every single CRM just because of that anomaly.
I'll just pass to Corin and then I'll come back to you, Steve.
Yeah, so that is something that we are aware of and we've talked about, and so we're pretty confident that there are at least a number of people who are unintentionally sending through a thing saying, I don't want to be contacted back, who do want to be contacted back. So we're working towards the basis that we'll contact everyone back, but that's going to take some time to actually get the system piece sorted. So it's a live conversation. The Mayor and I met with Dan and talked about this very issue and to start to make a plan about that.
Okay, so thank you. So in essence, there is the system that this antenna we've got, right? You're working on getting that so that everybody gets an answer, and we haven't got a timeline on that yet.
No, because and so there's 2 parts to this, right? So because you can just intentionally just start calling everybody back. Doesn't matter what comes through in the system, right? So there's our change in behaviour. The system itself is a larger thing because obviously that's supplied by a provider. They provide it to multiple councils. That's a change process. But we can change our behaviours without the change in the system.
But I'm trying to appease our clients, which is the ratepayers.
So the appease to the clients is that we will be contacting them back. So then, in essence, whether the system is sending through a callback or not becomes a bit irrelevant because we will be intentionally contacting people back.
And that won't necessarily, by the way, be a phone call. It's putting in a system that it could be in having some standardised email responses. This has been done. This is the outcome of what you're doing. And I agree with you entirely, Steve, because as elected members, it's something that we hear a lot from people. We absolutely are very focused on it, or Corin is very focused on it.
Yeah, because that's what we're kind of like, when you go to the dentist, next minute you get a survey report. So, yeah, that's the same lines. Not as if it can't be done, Yeah, thank you.
Go Chris and then Peter.
Thank you. Might be a quick one. We measure responded. Is it worth measuring resolution?
There is the function to measure resolution in the asset management tool. Like I say, some may never get responded to, or it might be years before it does. So resolved, yeah. Like I say, we start going down that rabbit hole. We're probably, I suppose, just touching on the like the CRM side of things, is we can add these complexities in there, which is adding, I suppose, time and effort to respond to. I know some of our supervisors will spend an hour and a half on the phone responding to some single CRM because we don't have the function to email back, for example. So, yeah, I suppose when we ask these questions, we just got to be conscious about how much burden it's putting on the staff base.
Thanks, Andrew. And I suppose it's the way that we set up the system, because we don't, when it comes through, it gets categorised and it will go on a list somewhere. It's not necessarily, that's come through, we're never going to do it, so resolved, we're going to tell them we're never going to do it. It gets prioritised, and at some point we will get to that, but we have higher priority first. So resolution could become a problem unless we were actively saying, we are not going to do that, here's why, and closing it off, but we actually do need to keep it in the system. Also for part of our funding bids, because that's part of our funding argument of we have this many outstanding, we haven't been able to get to this for a large amount of time. But I'll let you have a follow-up and then go to Peter.
Yeah, I just wanted to see if it was something that, and like you say, the work to create something like that and to measure that might be really hard, but whether that was something that needed to be in the long-term plan or somewhere else, and that was something, a consideration maybe. I don't really know where it's best sitting.
Thanks, Scott. No, my question was related to the same thing. It's been answered. Thank you.
I think part of what you're getting at is also ties into that customer satisfaction, customer service ethos, and often if we get back to them, if the issue has not been resolved, but we get back to them and we explain why, it can create as much satisfaction and sense of customer service as having resolved the issue. So I think we can kind of come at it from that angle, which we've already been talking about, and that reduces the complexity that Andrew was referring to.
And you're bang on there, right? And for many of us that have these sort of complaints, so when I've gone through and followed them up, nothing's been done, I did a CRM, and from their perspective that's absolutely true. When I've rung them back, even when it hasn't been with good news, it's the team have received it, they've assessed it transparently, it's not going to be done for some time or the foreseeable, and here's why. generally I've had a pretty good response. People are grateful that they at least know that it's been raised, and they get a bit of an appreciation for some of the wider challenges that we have. So that customer service ethos is certainly a priority for us. Is there another question over here? Sorry, I thought I saw a hand go. No, hand back over.
Okie dokie. Are there any more comments on the transport group? If not, I can see Joe up there on the screen. We could move on to waste management and minimisation. Okie dokie. Thanks, Andrew. The change, just sort of by way of summary, the changes recommended here are around just creating more clarity and distinction between the refuse side of things and the recycling side of things. Oh, hi, Roger. Great to see you here. In the recycling section, a much more specific set of measures around what's being recycled and how. So, anything you want to say, Roger?
I've just been, me, Scott, councillors, ladies and gentlemen, I've been supporting Joe just going through this process, and we really wanted to try and simplify it. We wanted to provide greater clarity around what's happening in terms of total refuse and what we're doing with recycling. And also we wanted to align it with our waste management minimisation plan, because that'll really support us in our engagement with Ministry for the Environment, or the new ministry. So that just some context.
Thanks, Ms. Scott. Just a really quick question. Why have we only got one mandatory requirement in this really important area? Is that all government is interested in?
Can I just look to Joe? Could you jump in here, please?
Sorry, Joe.
Hi, sorry, I don't know what happened there. I just dropped offline, so I missed all that, and I just came into Roger saying, Joe, could you jump in?
It was just a quick question, Joe. Out of all of the reporting measures, why is only one of them mandatory?
That is a really good question. I don't make those rules. There is only one that's mandatory, and that's to the MFE. We do annual reporting on the levy spend, as well as we do annual reporting on our recycling volumes. But yeah, it is the only one that is mandatory within our sector. Of course, they would have had mandated food waste, but that got dropped with new government.
Thanks, Joe. Question from Peter.
The mandatory one I noticed was the percentage of landfills, and that comes back to Sarah's point about the wording. It's a mandatory one, we can't change it. Therefore, can we, your proposed change, so we change it to numbers, because that makes it more clarity. You're going to have both, yeah.
No, we can't do that. You've been advised that it will need to remain. Yeah. That's why it's got the 100% there.
Yeah.
The 6 probably is just to provide some context in terms of how many landfills we're actually referring to.
Yeah, and further question, unrelated, was 3.3, and the other is a new category there. You've got no stats on it currently. An estimated 750 tonnes. How confident are we that that's real? And first of all, I'm going how could we have 750 tonnes of other stuff? And then I realised there was green waste in there as well. So I imagine a fair percentage of it is green waste. So first question was, how confident are we going to get to 750 tonnes? And then the next one was, should green race be separated out from everything else? Because it seems that it's very distinct to the rest of the others that you've got there.
Over in the very, very far right column, it has management's confidence levels.
Can you answer this, Joe, please?
Yeah. Yep, no worries. We are actually capturing this data now. Previously to us taking over the transfer station from our former contractor, these waste streams were not recorded. So we've put them onto our weighbridge system, and we've started capturing the volumes that are going out when they leave. So car batteries when they go and get recycled, or steel when it goes out, and e-waste when it goes off to Tararua, even the household batteries when they go out, the gas bottles, place in Gasworks in Napier comes down and picks them up. Everything that goes out now is being weighed. So we're actually sitting around the 700 to 800 tonne a year collectively at the moment, and that's before our recycle bays are up and running for the public.
Sorry, Joe, I find that hard to believe, because we were charged per tonnage when these trucks took it away, no matter whose company was driving it. So there must be data somewhere, because you get charged for that truck to go to wherever. I'm not saying since you've taken it over, Joe, I'm saying there must be data. Peter or somebody in this room might know that, but those trucks, I know last time we did this, $98,000 was saved since you've taken it in-house. So, but that, going back to that benchmarking, but there must be data somewhere, because we were charged it.
Yeah. So the gas bottles were getting recycled, but they weren't getting weighed out. They were getting picked up by Gasworks, but there wasn't any weights being recorded. And of course, there is more of an emphasis on that with MFE wanting you to increase your recycling volumes. I wasn't aware of all that until I sort of came in and took over, because they just organised Gasworks to pick it up, and yeah, we got an invoice from them, and you didn't really know how many gas bottles there were or what was in it, or yeah, it's a bit like the tyres that we've got with rims on them. There was no rims allowed, but we seem to have a heap of them with rims.
Thanks. I'll just let Steve ask a follow-up.
Yeah, no, thanks, Joe. As I say, we're indebted to the work you've been doing. It's great, because, we're saving money for the ratepayers, and that's great. But as I said, it's probably, you haven't got the answer because it's not in your realm, but the stuff that was measured, and this is going into some of those, not your gas bottles and the stuff that you're doing now, it was the previous stuff that was all going up to the Waipuck and et cetera. So there was volumes somewhere, must have that data, previous data.
That was the general refuse. The general refuse going to Waipuck, and the recycle, we've got all that data. This is the extra recycling that sort of was happening but wasn't really being captured. It wasn't even in last, our service performance measures up until now haven't captured all that extra recycling. So Tararua is actually recycling a lot more than what we've been reporting on previously. That's why I wanted to change the service performance measures now, because we are capturing all of it.
Great. Thanks, Joe.
Wow, that was efficient. Well done.
Thank you. With that in mind, we are almost at 11 o'clock, so I suggest we just have a 10-15 minute break, if that's okay. So if we're back here at 11:15, please. Welcome back, team. We'll kick on to our next segment, so I'll hand back to Rebecca.
Right, we're going to move on to Emergency Management Group, and I'll invite Pete to join me. For those of you online, the spreadsheet is updated. Right, so you can see there's been a few changes with this one, and a few attempts to make the measures more meaningful to the community. Some of them are a little bit challenging to do that, and as always, your input and feedback on that is really welcomed. So I guess, again, hand over to you. Comments, questions?
Peter.
Just the one. So on 3.1, we were sitting at 60% in 24-25. We would assume that that hasn't changed much.
People are self-sufficient.
27-28 target 60%, and then we jumped to 75% the following year. Seemed a big leap, and I was wondering how we're going to be able to put that into the long-term plan, whether you've got some idea that's going to help us drive that, but considering it's outside our control, this is actually the community being self-prepared, so it's tricky to measure, and obviously we'll get that back from the survey, but yeah, is there some idea about how we're going to be able to get the community to take that big leap, was my question.
There's probably a couple more ways, and that's through our community response groups, helping drive their communities to be self-sufficient. And probably the next one would be getting as many comms out as we can, promoting that self-sufficiency and what they can do to be self-sufficient. But yeah, I agree, they are big leaps, and it is out of our control. You can lead a horse to water, but you can't make them drink, so, you know. So I agree with you.
No, thank you for that. I've got a question from Erina.
Morena. Just wondering, the emergency management committees, is that the one that community boards attend and every, like all those sorts of people? Number 5.
Sorry, Erina, would you mind just asking that again? There was just a tiny bit of difficulty hearing you.
Sorry, the Tararua Emergency Management Committees, number 5, is that the one that community boards attend?
Yes, community boards, stakeholders that they are held every 3 months. We have two. We have a response one, and we have a welfare one straight afterwards.
So we're looking at taking that off we won't be doing that anymore?
The meetings will still be happening, but the measure, it was felt it's not useful for the community to know that.
Okay, yep, no, that's cool. Thank you.
Cool, thanks, Erina. Peter.
Thanks, Chair Scott. Peter, number 1, Council supports communities to develop response and recovery plans for the 13 community civil defence groups. I can think of 5 or 6, but where are all the rest?
You're probably thinking of the 5 or 6 urban ones, maybe. We've got a lot of rural ones as well. So since Cyclone Gabriel, I think before Cyclone Gabriel we had 6, and since then we've got another 7 that have communities put their hand up to come on board. Yep.
And I mean, that is incredible, and I'm aware of how engaged you've been with those groups to get them set up. Do you think over the 3-year period, and hopefully you're going to say yes, But do you think it's sustainable for that number to stay at 13 on the hope that we don't have any major civil defence events?
I will say yes and hope, but it is hard to keep some communities engaged when we don't have events, because life carries on and people just carrying on doing their own, everyday thing. But I do know if we had another event in that area, even though they've been reasonably quiet in communications with us, I know that they'll still be there. Yep.
No, great answer. Thank you. Any, yes, we'll go Rebecca.
Can I just note that with the 13 groups, you'll see the targets. It's changed from an 80% keeping the plans up to date, 80% target to the focus on the support of the groups to update their plans, and that 13 is split across 2 years. So that the idea is that they would update their plan every 2 years.
No, very good. Sharon.
Thank you, Mayor Scott. I don't want to be the Grinch, but there's no mandatory reporting requirements for this, really, something that's being described as a core service, which I find shocking, to be honest. And I also reflect a little bit, Pete, on 2 of the discretionary measures are about meetings. And, I reflect on the role that you have and council is legislated to provide. When things go down, it's this critical service that it concerns me that we're measuring meetings and not. I appreciate. There's reflection here in the community support. There's a reflection in how well is our community ready to respond and look after themselves for 3 days. But it appalls me that there isn't something generic across DIA that hasn't required us to do anything. The one measure that I thought was missing, and I'm throwing it out there for debate because here I am trying to make things simpler, is there the possibility that, because I know when events happen elsewhere, Pete, where we can supply and provide skilled personnel to go and support. And I think that goes to our reputation and our level of skill and our team that we have in this group. Not that I want to make up a number or make up another measure, but when I looked at this overall, I thought that I think there's still something missing that reflects the value and the importance of this particular activity to our community. And I don't know if I've got the measure right, but I was thinking, we send very skilled people away to help other communities. Is that something we should know about? I'm not up for making more, but I don't think these measures capture completely what this core activity, and here I am trying to make it simpler.
I'll let Peter answer that.
Yeah. It's I suppose, if and when we do send staff away to support other communities, it can be reported on, but we have the skills there to be able to do it, but we don't always do it because of capacity and lots of other reasons. So, to have a measure in there like that, I don't know whether at times we'll be able to measure it, if you know what I mean, because we haven't supplied those skills. It's something that I could report on to the Performance Monitoring Committee in the quarterly report, definitely, but yeah.
And I think just a quick comment on that, and I get what you mean, because sometimes these are an opportunity for us to celebrate the successes of the team, but there's a couple of Peter mentioned a couple. There's a couple of other dependencies on that reporting. One would be the number of events, which is hard to predict. The other one, and Peter probably doesn't want to say this, but I'm happy to, when there were events when we weren't in the middle of one, I know that I was quite disappointed that we were not asked to go up and help when we had the capability and the capacity to do it. So I'm very, very keen for us, one, to be building experience and capacity in other events, helping our neighbours, because we're going to need our neighbours to help us in situations. But it is reliant on us being thought of and being asked, because it's run at a regional level. And I certainly shared some displeasure at that missed opportunity. I'll go Peter Naylor, then Peter Johns. Did you have one as well? Peter Naylor, then Peter Johns.
So just further to Sharon's point, there is no measure here of our level of preparedness. I know we are really well prepared. We've got so many people that are well trained, and 95% of council is, or whatever the reporting stuff was there. But 3.1. That's the meetings.
No, sorry.
Oh, 3.1, sorry.
So
Percentage of respondents.
So that's about the preparedness.
No, I'm talking about preparedness of our officers. 4.1. Sorry, you're correct. Yep, I didn't remember that one.
No. And look, that is something, by the way, that is not just a performance measure stat, that's a stat that goes into the regional civil defence meetings and is reported on. And it's always a really nice one for me to be sitting in the room, because we are always performing at a very, very high level. The thing is, we have to, as a council that is regularly impacted by weather events, with a smaller headcount than many other councils, we have to have everyone being trained, to as many as possible, so people can step in. And I've been very impressed to see that head into action. 5 times in this term we've had major weather events? Peter.
Thanks, Scott. My question was almost identical. I hadn't actually seen that, but it just occurs to me that perhaps that should be mandatory, not discretionary. I mean, it's one of our core services.
To be fair, we could say lots of things we think should be mandatory. That's not within our gift as a council. That's up to government of what they believe should be. And I was going to make the comment to the Deputy Mayor, because I don't disagree with it. This might change somewhat as government benchmarking comes through. And that is the difficulty of having to do this process now, because we may need to change some of our measures, because there could be a whole lot of mandatory measures coming in soon. Rebecca.
I've been collecting up comments as the conversation has unfolded, so I just wanted to address some of them. So just to clarify Councillor Ward's, the level of service 2 and 2.1, they have been adjusted to internal measures. So while they're focusing on meetings, that's around the intent behind that is around participation in the regional group, but the team agreed that it wasn't really that useful for the community, so bringing that as an internal measure. So that wouldn't show up necessarily in the LTP. The number 1 or 1.1, totally get your point about that one being focused on meetings, and that one was another tricky one to find the wording, because that was one where previously it said percentage of community response plans are up to date, and that's an example of that's really what we want, and that's really critical for those community groups, but it's actually not in our control, because those response plans belong to those groups. What is our role? Our role is to support. How do we support? We go along to meetings to help them in the process of updating their plans. So, but I was thinking just in this session, we could probably change the wording of the measure to emphasise the support rather than the meetings, even though the meeting is the measure. So there's that. The other thing I wanted to say was there are other opportunities to tell the story within the LTP and reporting process of how amazing the team is and what they do and when they go away to support external events and things like that. And one of those ways is in the activity statement. So in the LTP where we describe what the activity does, that could be one of the things that when the opportunity or the need arises, our team is really skilled and ready to assist in other events. And that can be done through the annual report, depending on how you want to do that as well. So even if we don't have a measure, there are ways to register that in the LTP. I think that was all my collection. So, moving on from emergency management. Thanks,
It appears so. Thanks very much, Peter. I appreciate it. Hello, James. Welcome to the table.
Sorry, I'm just changing the screen so that. Here we go. Regulatory Services Group. Again, taken as read. All the difficult questions for Jim, please.
Peter.
There shouldn't really be any.
This seems to be the opposite of emergency services in that everything is mandatory. Sorry, so I was just coming back to some of the non-mandatory ones. Sorry, statutory, that was right. So what was the difference between mandatory, statutory and discretionary?
Thank you, Peter.
Mandatory.
So there's, it might just be a difference in wording, but there's resource consents plan and planning are mandatory, and then the statutory is under compliance and monitoring.
Right, yeah, so through the chair, I think it's just a wording issue. They're pretty much statutory. Yeah. Different team leader.
Just a quick, probably more of a comment on number one, where it's changed from satisfaction to timeliness. I think that's a good change, by the way. I think we're moving away from a subjective measure for a legislatively driven process. So this is residents are satisfied with the animal control service change to council provides a timely and efficient animal control service. I think that is an important distinction that we as elected members need to see. Just want to support that. Any other comments of all of the mandatory ones that we can't change? Peter Johns.
Thanks, Scott. Jim, on the building control side of things, we often get comments from people looking to get building consents or the like that are quite negative. Well, I've certainly had some recently. Compared with about 7 or 8 years ago, we've actually got 2 or 3 letters from developers congratulating and thanking council for for being helpful and etc., etc. That seems to have changed. We discussed this, and in fact it's one of our mantras, we're a can-do council, and we decided upon that because particularly in the likes of your area, where I know you're conflicted to a large extent, there are things you have to do, but it's an attitude thing. If somebody wants to do something, it may be that you say, well, look, you can't do it that way, but if you were to do something such and such, we might be able to do that sort of thing, rather than saying, no, can't do it, bang. And I just wonder whether we need something in here that reflects our people's thinking about how regulatory is working for them. Not sure how you'd do that.
Through the chair, I think in the activity statements that's captured. It could be a fair statement to say in the past perhaps the activity wasn't managed correctly. How do I diplomatically say that? It's being done correctly now, and as a result of that, when people apply for building consents, if there's a poor consent that's submitted, or one that's sadly lacking in information, it would not be unusual for a consent to be returned with RFIs to be answered, further information, or even declined because of the standard of the application. And we have had a couple of people that have complained, and they've gone through to MB for assessment, independent from us, and they've come back and said they backed us to the hilt. So it is a standard, I guess, where if there hasn't been a standard held to for some time, and all of a sudden it is, it might appear to be a gross change, but in actual fact, compared with the rest of the country, we are doing quite well. We do provide advice to people if we see that they are off track or they don't understand. We've gone back to people multiple times, and sometimes we still have issues with their what they submit. So we're kind of in a damned if you do, damned if you don't situation, but at the end of the day, my focus as the manager is to make sure that we apply our accreditation, and that is something that we're audited on from IANZ, and if they pick up that we're not correctly returning consents that have that are not reaching the standard, then we put ourselves in jeopardy for our accreditation.
I just have a comment here, and then I'll come back to you if that's okay, and then I have Steve in the queue. I agree with Councillor Johns that we have an opportunity here to find a way to be able to measure the council direction of being a can-do council, and I don't take anything away from your statutory responsibilities, and I fully support you in making sure that our statutory responsibilities are met. I do really want some more consideration given to these performance measures, though, where we can show that within that framework we are able to demonstrate that we are being enabling. And I don't know the exact solution for this yet. I want to give it a bit more thought. But one idea is we have, percentage of building consents done within the statutory 20-day guideline. Great. That's our bare minimum legally that we have to do. I would like to see a further measure of actually what in reality, how long in reality is it taking? Is everyone getting their response on day 20? I know that's not what happens, but then we can actually give some consideration to what, do we just have to be at the minimum? Do we want to be faster? Is that a decision that we have to make when we're looking at resourcing for the LTP? Growth is one of our key areas. Can-do's one of our key areas. And this space is either a block on that because we're not resourcing it properly or we don't have the right systems, or it can be a real enabler for the growth that we want and the can do. And it goes into all of our areas, the reputation, identity, growth. So I don't know the answer, but I feel like this is one, and it's probably through to the CE, who's pretty well aware of what our direction is, of how we can display that and enable your team to deliver what this council's wanting to deliver in those areas. So it's a long way to say I support Peter. I don't take anything away from what you need to do, and it's certainly not a criticism. We need to find a way to be able to meet the objectives we have as a council through your team. So I just wanted to pop that in there, Jim, if that's okay. Yep, Chief Executive.
Through you, Chair. So I think that is something for us to explore, and I guess I'm just pondering as you're saying that, whether it's an LTP measure or an internal measure which is designed to enable us to move the business where we want to move it. And that's an open question. But it may be, like listening to what you're saying, that it's an internal measure which actually gives us a guide on where we're at. We know through the LTP that we're meeting our statutory obligations. This is about a desire to go further than that and actually be in a customer-centric can-do space, but take direction on that.
And my only comment on that, Corin, and that's fine. However, I'm very, very mindful of the split between governance and operations, and we respect that. What we need to do, though, is have some mechanism from a governance level where we can be monitoring that, having some oversight to that, and to be able to ask some questions around it. So let's perhaps take that offline, but I think it's a comment very, very well made. So I thank you, Councillor Johns. I'll just go Rebecca first, who's been desperate to jump in, and then I'll go back to you, Jim.
I just wondered, the conversation that we had earlier around the customer service ethos and bringing a measure through for each of the teams, I'm wondering whether that would cover off what you're talking about, or whether there's some other specifics that you would like to consider.
Let's, how does the Deputy Mayor say, let's percolate on that. But no, thank you. This is what I want these to be, a really good discussion where we're testing that. Councillor Steve's been waiting a while. Apologies.
Hey, no problem. Thank you. Yeah, in the same vein as Councillor Peter and the Mayor, we're trying to be this can-do council, and I just, this is an opinion and then a question. We seem to be hamstrung by constraints that you're putting up because of the regulation which you have to operate in. I understand that. But what I don't understand, there are councils that have, and I've mentioned it in this room, where people don't build there, they build there because they have a better, what's the word I'm looking for? Experience. Yeah, thank you, Sharon. Experience. And everything just flows because we can get economic growth going and everything else going that increases our rate take. And I can't figure out, and there might be an obvious answer which I've missed, why that regulation must be blanketed across the country. That's the question. Everyone must run with the same rules, surely. Like as you know, I'm in the electrical trade. We've only got one set of regulations and rules that run for New Zealand and Australia, and then that's it. It's called the Bible of the electrical regulations, and that's it. So what's the variation? I know there's bylaws, but yeah, just a short answer on that, please.
Through the chair, yeah, I've heard similar things before, and when we've actually investigated, we found that they're doing the same thing. And what happens is a few people who can't get their applications up to scratch, for example, do the biggest squealing. And I think there's a huge majority of people that get good customer service. I'm quite happy to put a customer service satisfaction thing in. At the moment in regulatory, the only place that appears is in animal control, which is probably the hardest thing of all council to get to achieve when you're dealing with 80% of naughty dog owners. And yet there it is, and we've never actually achieved the target because it's too high. So look, I'm quite happy to put that in there, but I would dispute the fact that it's easier at some places. If that is the case, I would like to see whether they're complying with the regulations. We can be can-dos as to a point, but the legislation trumps everyone, and I have to comply with that. If they're doing it that easy, I really would like a job there.
Sorry, I'll go to Steve and then I'll make a comment.
Yeah, we have got a case at the moment, and they've had independent, and they've trumped the trumped, and we're still in the stalemate. So, yeah, that's where it's interesting. But anyhow, I'll just leave it with that.
And just to make a comment, it is interesting. One set of rules there are. The way that those rules are applied can be different, and you could have our council not applying the rules correctly, and I do not want to be sending. Yes, I'll come to you in a second, Councillor Peter. I don't want to be suggesting for a second that we should not be complying with rules. We need to. I guess what I'm more interested in is definitely measuring the service, and it's pleasing to hear you say that you believe the vast majority would be happy. That is fantastic to hear. Let's show that in the measure. But some of it's also around speed. So we have to absolutely meet a service, but how quickly do we do that? That can dramatically change someone's experience with the process if the process happens quickly. And there's resourcing considerations for that, but it's very good that we're heading into the long-term plan. So those are some of the things that I'd like to tease out and understand, not necessarily about changing the process, but how can we demonstrate to our community that we are taking a can-do approach to growth, to service, etc. Peter.
Thanks, Chair Scott. Yeah, further to Steve's comment, I recently had a call from a guy I know who was currently dealing with council on a building job, but he made the comment to me that on 3 occasions, 2 were garage national companies that sell garages around the company, and the other was a transportable company. I don't know whether it was whoever that relocate houses and the like. All 3 of them, they asked, which council was he in? And he said Tararua, and he said, basically all said, Jesus, that'd be the worst council we deal with. Now, I wasn't going to mention that, Jim, but there's obviously something behind that. For 3 companies.
Probably a separate conversation.
It feels to me like we're actually moving out of looking at the measures and actually getting a critique of the operation. So I think we need to... Councillor?
Sorry, Peter, please, if we can just leave it there, we can have this discussion separately. Let's stay with the measures.
Thank you. Just a quick one. I noticed in the formatting of this spreadsheet here, there's some word wrapping missing on some of this, because there seems to be a few data pieces that may extend beyond that. So is it able to put wrapping on C on your table up there? So column C. So for instance, under 2 on the dog, under the dog, animal control, that one there seems to be word wrapped there. It needs word wrapping. And then on building control, 2.1, there's a whole heap further down as well.
Yes, so apologies for that. sorry that I didn't have the thing on. So anything for compliance and monitoring, compliance monitoring.
And it's probably through you, Ms. Scott, to Jim directly. Given that there's a heck of a lot of stuff you have to do, is there some other stuff of a discretionary nature that would add value to this particular service? I guess here I am trying to make it simpler and less, but
That's two segments in a row,
I know,
Deputy
well,
Mayor. Just that I've mentioned that, but please continue.
I mean, one of the frustrating things is yes, I appreciate this is, you've got to do it. You know, we're arguing over a little bit of the how that might happen rather than the fact that it exists, that it has to be done. But are there some areas that you and the team would look at and go, we're doing it, we're just not being measured on it? And wouldn't that add value to the role that we have? If there isn't, I'm prepared to accept a Sarah Walsh answer, no, that's fine. But I think it would be remiss of us if we were further down the track to look at this particular core activity and go, we're not really measuring what we should. I'm just throwing it out there, and if the answer is no, Jim, I appreciate and respect that. But I think it would be remiss of us, given that you've got to do what you've got to do. Is there something else that would add value that you don't have to do?
You're speaking purely about compliance and monitoring. Well, it's such a wide, varied thing that we do all sorts of things, like even trapping cats, which people don't realise. And but whether we'd want to have that as an LTP measure, it's actually a regional council function. But yeah, so there's a variety of things. It covers, complaints about trees from the neighbouring property over a footpath, to abandoned vehicles, to litter, alcohol enforcement, Food Act enforcement, that sort of thing. So
you report those internally to us in management reports anyway. I've seen, reflections of that. So it is really an internal measure then in some respects, isn't it, that you're holding the team to account for rather than an LTP one. You don't need to write too many comments on that one, Rebecca. I'm just reflecting.
Thank you. And I'll just remind the Deputy Mayor to please come through the chair, and I'll move to Peter Naylor and then Steve.
I think just based on the previous conversation where we were talking about perception of how we respond, and your comment that through the chair, your comment that your feeling is that most people are really happy with it. I feel that having a measure on that would be great, because then that counteracts because all we hear at the moment is the negatives. And so if there's some way or some thought can be put into, at the end of the building consent process, a customer satisfaction survey, Steve talked about earlier, with your dentist appointment and things. So if there's some way that we could say, how did you find the process? Have you got any comments on how we could improve, all that sort of stuff? How do you rate us compared to other councils if you're a national organisation? That would be, I feel like that would be a really good thing. And then we don't have these conversations around, okay, if we're getting a 95% satisfaction rating, then we know that 5% of the noise, which is taking up 100% of our time now, is only 5%. So that would be something I would personally like to see considered.
And I'll come to Steve in a second. Just as a bit of a general comment around that, this is a real responsibility we have as councillors, and it is incredibly difficult, I'm sure, for staff to just hear hearsay of what concerns might be. And actually, I don't think it's appropriate at the table for that, because what our job to do, and you're starting to talk about it, is if we believe there might be something that is not performing at the level that we think it should be, then we should be discussing a way to measure that as a governance team to prove whether that is true or whether it is not true. That is our responsibility to do, not talking about someone told me this or someone told me that. If they did, then let's make sure we've got a way to be able to monitor and measure that. So we've kind of had this part of the discussion saying, and that was mentioned to the Chief Executive, that I am very, very keen for us to do a bit more work around this. But that will be the time. As Rebecca said, this is not the only discussion we're going to be having in this area, but I think instead of trying to do it on the fly, let's make sure it's a considered way of doing it in conjunction with the team that know the area far better than what we do. So I just wanted to make that comment, Steve.
You took the words right out of my mouth, Your Worship. Thank you very much.
Thanks, I'll hand back.
Yeah, thanks, Mayor Scott. Could I just say, which might help the understanding of council, is that a lot, well, when I say a lot, the complaints or whatever, the feedback you've had that's negative, a lot of the time it's resulting in, like as I said, returned consents and issues with that. And a lot of the time they are not processed by our specific team. They're processed by our contractors. And when we do receive a complaint, we actually take a look at it ourselves to see if the contractor's done the correct thing. And often the answer is yes, we would have come to the same conclusion. And on those very rare events where the person still complains, we've sent it to MB for an impartial, and that's 3 different consenting people that have come to the same conclusion. So just to let you to know, I can't comment obviously on specifics, I don't know what you're talking about.
And look, point well made. So we'll move that to the side. But just do know for you and your team that we acknowledge that you work in a very difficult and legislatively driven environment, and your team have to put up with a fair bit of stick sometimes, and we're grateful to you. So thank you. You don't look a day over 67.
All right, we'll keep Jim at the table just a little while longer. And the next page is around resource consent planning and district planning. And just a reminder that these two under the current LTP, these 2 activities are combined, sit together as district planning. But through the changes that are coming through, they have been split out. So the implementation of the district plan essentially is the resource consents planning as a separate activity, and then the district planning as a separate activity. And so what that has meant is that we've had to rethink the way we describe those levels of service and measures and targets to reflect that they are separate activities. So this has had a bit of an overhaul, and this, under the resource consents planning, this has had similar treatment to, I believe, the animal control measures to focus on efficiency and timeliness, and also I think there was a bit of duplication there in the way those things were described, so we've tried to tidy that up a bit. In terms of the district planning, that's one that where there's been some wrapping issues.
Could I just make a similar comment here in district planning? Not one to traverse here, but for the Chief Executive to look at. Again, very, very similar comments to how can we display that we're being enabling. The time frame would be a key one that I'd like some consideration to seeing the measure either here or in some other reporting would be handy.
So, comments or questions?
I think it's probably similar. That sort of it's almost a little bit packaged up to how we might be able to display that, and that this also comes down to resourcing.
Yes. Yeah, through the chair, I think we could probably, that new measure there with the friendly customer service, another one which we could kind of panel beat into. Doing as can do as we can. Yeah.
Like that can do doesn't mean breaching rules, and so I don't want to give any sort of suggestion of that. That can do's actually the ethos around that, from my perspective, is can do is you have a rule or a roadblock. How do we figure out good ways to be able to still get good outcomes while traversing that? So it's not about trying to shortcut anything. Corin.
Through you, Chair. And this is one that will get interesting. So when the two bills become acts, that is going to substantially change some of the activity. It's going to focus on individual property rights quite strongly, which will lead to potentially quite a bit of conflict within the community, where people who are used to being able to actually object will no longer be able to object because the individual property right will trump. And council will find itself drawn, willingly or unwillingly, into that space. So that will be, so we will know that before this LTP is passed, and it may mean that some of these measures need a tweak to actually accurately reflect what our role is going to look like once we actually know what those acts are. My understanding is they've been delayed. They were supposed to come, I think, this month. They're now out a month or two, so that means they're still sitting with the select committee, so there's something going on there. So we'll wait and see what that looks like.
No, there is something going on there, and I mean, fairly publicly. Of it's becoming very political this close to the election. But, that is something that potentially we will have to face, an enabling system where people have been able to come to council to object or to make comment, no longer being able to do that. I mean, ministers are talking about, I did hear 40% of consents they believe will disappear. The language then moved to 50%, I've heard, which there will be some challenging outcomes, whether you agree with the legislation or not. There will be some challenging outcomes that come from that, and council will probably be fairly squarely in the firing line, even though we have no influence over it. So another great bit of reform to look forward to, although it could have some quite positive growth outcomes as well.
Thanks, Jim. That brings us to the end of the regulatory group.
Thanks very much, Jim.
That's all good.
So the next one on the lineup is community and recreational facilities, but I think Fontaine, yeah. Fantastic. Sorry, I was going to skip over you. I thought you weren't here, but you might join us.
Just sorry, before we run to the next segment, I just want to quickly double check.
So 1 o'clock is that what you mean?
Yes. What we might do, we've got our next session at 1 o'clock, which is an OAG session. I think we do need to have a break and have lunch, so apologies we haven't been able to get to this part, but I am keen for everyone to be able to have a decent break. So we will jump into lunch now, but thank you, and thank you very much to the team for all their work. We'll be back at 1.